Good afternoon, and welcome to today's webinar on the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Transportation Alternatives Program. My name is Merrill Meckler-Hickson. I'm the Section Chief for WisDOT Local Programs and Finance. With me today is Travis Hooley, the statewide TAP and CMAQ Program Manager, and Andy Bill, the Director of the University of Wisconsin's Transportation Information Center. And today we will be providing you with an overview of our newest program solicitation for the Transportation Alternatives Program that will supplement our BIL program cycle scheduling in federal fiscal years 2023 through 2026. For this supplemental solicitation, we are introducing a new TAP program component for rural areas that we are calling STARS, or Safe Transportation Alternatives for Rural Schools. Today's agenda is displayed on the screen. I will start with a short overview of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. Following that, TAP Statewide Program Manager Travis Hooley will give an overview of the TAP STARS initiative, along with the details on how to apply for a TAP STARS project, with some additional information provided by Andy Bill from the UW-TIC. I will then give some additional general tips on applying for federal grants. So most folks viewing the presentation today have likely been hearing a lot of talk about the bill over the past year. So what exactly is the bill? Signed on November 15th, 2021, with the funding approved in March of 2022, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or BIL, represents a historic increase in the federal funding that's available for local programs over the next 5 fiscal years. There will be significant increases in all of the local programs that are federally funded through the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program. This includes Wisconsin's Surface Transportation Program, or STP, the Local Bridge Improvement Assistance Program, the Transportation Alternatives Program, which we'll be talking about today, and the Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Program, or CMAQ, which has eligibility in the eastern part of the state bordering Lake Michigan. So we definitely have had our work cut out for us this year at WisDOT Local Programs. We're just finishing up work for the first funding year of the bill, Federal Fiscal Year 2022, and we are now shifting our focus on to the remaining years of the funding cycle. Now, even though the bill is federally funded, I did want to talk a little bit about another factor that WisDOT really does need to keep front of mind as we develop our response to the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law that has nothing to do with what is in the federal legislation. In Wisconsin, we must follow the direction of the state legislature when there is an unexpected increase in federal funding that exceeds 5%. In these circumstances, the department must submit a new federal expenditure plan to the Wisconsin Joint Committee on Finance, which then has the power to make changes to what the department proposes. This itself has been a significant factor in the way that we delivered the federal fiscal year 22 BIL local program increase. The best example is a specific requirement that the Finance Committee made for the CMAQ program in federal fiscal year 2022 that restricted the use of the BIL increase in CMAQ to right-of-way projects. And a good example of that would be a traffic signalization project, rather than allowing that funding increase to be utilized for essentially any other project like pedestrian trails or transit vehicle purchases. This federal plan requirement was a significant factor that the department had to account for when we developed our response to the BIL, and it necessitates that our plans remain as flexible as possible all the way through these solicitation rollouts. This is going to continue to impact the department's planning efforts for federal fiscal year 23, as we will need to submit another Fed plan to the Joint Finance Committee very soon. Future BIL funding years, though, will be addressed with the initial WisDOT budgets that are submitted as part of the regular biennial budget process. So with that, I would like to turn things over to Statewide Program Manager Travis Hooley, who will give an overview of the TAP STARS initiative.
Thank you, Merrill. My name is Travis Hooley, and I am the WisDOT Statewide Local Program Manager responsible for the Transportation Alternatives Program. Today, I will be addressing the question of what is TAP STARS. The Transportation Alternatives Program, also known as TAP, is a federally funded reimbursement program with a maximum federal participation of 80% of eligible project costs. Projects are selected competitively by either a statewide committee or by representatives of metropolitan planning organizations who have a population greater than 200,000. These are also known as transportation management areas. The TAP program emphasizes the generation or enhancement of non-motorized utilitarian trips. In the state of Wisconsin, eligible projects are categorized as either non-infrastructure or infrastructure improvements. Activities like planning studies, safe routes to school programming projects, as well as design and construction of non-motorized facilities are all considered eligible. Entities that may consider applying for TAP include local units of government, public transit agencies, tribal government bodies, school districts or schools independently, as well as nonprofit entities. In the state of Wisconsin, we have what is called the commencement rule, which is codified by Wisconsin state statute. Now, the definition of commencement does vary based on the activity of your project, but for the time being, it is important to note that project sponsors must demonstrate commencement within 4 years of receiving their award. More information on commencement requirements will be communicated to successful sponsors through Sponsors Guide training. Additionally, in the state of Wisconsin, metropolitan planning organizations who have a population greater than 200,000, again, also known as transportation management areas, receive a funding sub-allocation and are subsequently eligible to identify projects within their purview to be considered for federal funding. Now, the STAR stands for the Safe Transportation Alternatives for Rural Schools. The reason this solicitation has been labeled in this manner is due to the fact that under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the vast majority of our available funding is available to communities who have a population less than 5,000 who are also outside of MPO areas. WisDOT will accept applications from communities within other population areas, for example, areas with populations of 5 to 50,000 or 50 to 200,000, but please note that funding availability in these other areas is limited. Furthermore, the STAR solicitation focuses primarily on non-infrastructure safe routes to school programming and planning study activities, as well as smaller scale infrastructure improvements. However, it is important to note that for those of you who have eligible project proposals that are larger in scale, WisDOT will not preclude any eligible sponsor from submitting an application. However, again, please note that funding constraints do limit our ability to award projects across all population areas. Looking at the next 4 years of programming, WisDOT has developed a multi-pronged approach to how we are going to be prioritizing project scheduling. During the first 2 years of the program, our focus will be on planning, safe routes to school programming, as well as design activities. Those design activities will subsequently lead to infrastructure construction projects planned in the latter 2 years of the program, all while maintaining a focus on continuing to schedule safe routes to school program projects. Now, the next question you may find yourself asking is, why safe routes to school? Well, it's important to note that rural communities and schools have a great need for the benefits that safe routes to school programming provides. In fact, rural communities have just as great or greater needs for safe routes to school programming when compared to more urban communities, where non-motorized transportation may be more centrally ingrained within the transportation network. Many factors contribute to the need for safe routes to school, such as access to bicycle pedestrian facilities or proximity to hazards. Additionally, TAP program data reflects a limited historic participation in safe routes to school activities in these rural areas of the state. Now, this could be for many potential reasons, but the two primary factors that the department has identified are a lack of local resources to deliver these activities, as well as the overall financial constraints derived from the minimum cost share requirements of this federal aid program. The STAR solicitation addresses both of these issues by first reducing the minimum project cost requirements and by creating an additional safe routes to school support network through stakeholder partnerships that will ultimately assist in the application development, project administration, and ultimate delivery of your safe routes to school program. Now, let's turn our attention to the application materials themselves. The STAR solicitation was announced on November 1st of 2022, and the application deadline for non-TMA projects is March 24th of 2023. If your project is located within a transportation management area, please contact your TMA representative to confirm application timelines. It is anticipated that successful sponsors will receive award notifications and be contacted by the department to discuss scheduling in July of 2023. Now, let's turn our attention to the application materials themselves, starting with how to access them. You'll start by going to the wisconsin.dot.gov webpage and in the search bar typing BIL. The second search result will be the WisDOT BIL webpage for Federal Fiscal Years 2023 through 2026. You'll know that you're on the right page when you see the language in red text at the top of the screen that says New BIL Solicitations. And approximately halfway down the page, you'll find Federal Fiscal Year 23 to 26 TAP solicitation materials. Included here are the application instructions as well as the application document itself. Please be sure to review both the application instructions and the document itself before completing the application. The next several slides will include images of key pages from the application. And the first thing that you'll notice is that applicants are asked to confirm the appropriate geographic population area. As we await updated 2020 census data, please utilize population estimates from the 2010 decennial census for this solicitation. If you are unsure whether or not your community falls within an MPO urbanized area, maps of borders can be found at the link provided on the application. Whether or not you are located within an urbanized area is a key piece of information moving forward in the TAP program under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. On the next page of the application, you will find eligible categories of activities. These include, at a high level, all of the activities that you may consider applying for in the program. The first listed is engineering, which you will have if you have an infrastructure project, including design or construction activities. The rest of the list includes non-infrastructure activities with engagement, encouragement, education, and evaluation, all being specific types of activities eligible in the Safe Routes to School programming classification. The last checkbox is specific to planning studies, which are non-infrastructure projects that focus on identifying future community needs, whether they be non-infrastructure or infrastructure improvements. The next few pages of the application ask for a variety of information, including things like project benefit, description of existing facilities, and for Safe Routes to School sponsors, demographic information is also requested. Now, it is important to note that there's a lot of information being asked for on this page of the application in the way of school demographics. And it is important that if you are completing an application for Safe Routes to School, that you complete this section to the best of your ability. If additional space is needed, WisDOT will also accept information in a separate attachment. And if you're having trouble finding this data, either through local sources or state resources, the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction's website listed on the application is a great place to start in your search for this detail. Once you have completed these pages of the application, the next section requires project cost estimate details. These next few pages of the application include tables that must be filled out based on the activity being proposed in your application. Please note that in addition to completing this section, all project applications must include a separate detailed cost estimate attached to your application packet. We'll start in the top left corner, where you'll notice checkboxes for engineering, planning studies, and Safe Routes to School programming projects. If you have an infrastructure or planning study project, your completion of these pages will be limited to that upper left section of what's depicted on screen. Regardless of the type of project application, all applicants do need to include a schedule preference date based on the fiscal year that is most preferred by the applicant. Please note, however, that while WisDOT does take schedule preferences into consideration, we are ultimately tied to specific funding limits per year, and schedule dates are subject to change and vary from your local preference. The remaining pages depicted on screen are specific to Safe Routes to School programming projects, and you'll notice that these pages include a list of 5 detailed Safe Routes to School programming options. Each of these options builds upon the last with respect to the scope of included activities. Additionally included are approximate cost estimates for each of the proposed activities that are included with said options. Also provided is a sixth option for local sponsors to consider building your own program. This option exists for those who have an interest in building a program from the ground up, or those of you who may have existing Safe Routes to School programs that have specific needs. Lastly, every application is required to include a grand total at the end of this cost detail section. That field is located on the last page of the cost detail section and is depicted on screen in the bottom right corner. It is important that all totals listed in this section of the application are consistent with the separate cost detail estimate provided with your application. Before submission, please review both the application and cost estimate for consistency. Now, in the coming weeks, WisDOT will release a tool that aids applicants by specifically identifying communities who are less than 5,000 in population and who are outside of metropolitan planning areas. In the sample image on screen, green shading indicates communities who meet these requirements. Final rollout of this tool is planned for mid-December of 2022. More details regarding access to this tool will be provided on our BIL solicitation webpage along with the application materials. At this time, I'd like to introduce the director of the University of Wisconsin Transportation Information Center, Andy BIL. Andy will walk us through tools and resources that you might consider leveraging as you prepare your application for submission.
Thank you, Travis, very much. My name is Andy BIL. I'm the director of the Transportation Information Center at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And we are part of the Local Technical Assistance Program Network, which is across all 50 states. Go to the next slide, please. The goal of the Transportation Information Center is to give local technical assistance throughout the state. We are be able to help towns, villages, cities, and counties. And we can offer several different ways of that help. One is through technical assistance, being able just to answer basic questions about what's happening on your roadways, what training is needed, what statutes need to be followed. We can also provide technical assistance in understanding what grant opportunities are out there, similar to what we're talking about today, as well as being able to answer any questions with regards to how to put those grants together. The other way that we can help is through resources. We provide bulletins on our website. We provide training as well through that website. The last and definitely not the least part of it is being able to provide data and being able to give some technical assistance on how to look at that data. And we'll talk about several of those options today. Mostly we focus on the safety and the roadway side of the house with data, but there's other options as well too. So please let us know if you have any questions about those. Next slide. So as you go through the application process, I wanted to think about kind of where might you get some of this data and what might you look at with regards to it. So under the safety area, it talks about looking at documented bike and pedestrian crashes involving school-aged children or crossing guards at arrival or dismissal times, as well as looking at, are there crossings of state highways, main arterial roadways, or other high-speed or high-traffic volume roadways, or kind of this lack of bicycle pedestrian facilities or lack of connectivity of facilities that do not exist. So one way to be able to get to that first bullet there is being able to look at the crash data. The Wisconsin Department of Transportation and the Wisconsin Traffic Operations and Safety Laboratory have an access to be able to provide crash data out to all forms of government. To be able to get this, you need to have a user account. And so here on this page is a user account request form. You can see it's pretty basic information. As long as your email address is something with a town or village or government way, totally fine. If your work address definitely is a Gmail, make sure that in that organization you type in what type of municipality or agency, government agency that you're from. Next slide, please. So as we think about how to look at this, these are kind of the existing facilities and projects that might impact the proposed projects. And these are yes/no questions. It's kind of way to look through it. When we get to the next slide, we'll talk about how you can understand or look to see if there are rail facilities nearby, if you know known safety issues, or if there's kind of proximity to county and state federal highways. Next slide, please. So once you have your access to your crash data, you can use community maps, which is what's shown here. There are 3 different tabs across the top: Search, Advanced, or Predictive Analytics. The Search tab is open to anybody. You actually don't need a password to be able to get into that, and that'll give you some basic information, kind of querying down to the county level, and being able to look at some pedestrian bicycle areas. But if you really want to get down to specific jurisdictions and look at different time periods, I recommend that you go to this Advanced tab. As you can see, kind of in that right-hand corner, it says Welcome BIL. I've already logged into this site. And what I've done here is I've queried pedestrian and bicycle crashes in the city of Racine for a 10-year period, because I wanted to see where those crashes were happening and looking at them a little bit more carefully. So on the left-hand side, you'll see information about those crashes, what type, what severity level it was. So the first one here happened at 8th Street at Main Street in the city of Racine in the county of Racine. It was unfortunately a suspected serious injury crash, and it happened on January 8th, 2018, and it had a flag of a pedestrian. What's nice about community maps is that not only are you able to see where the crashes have occurred, you can see these dots here on the roadway, but you can also be able to use what Google calls the peg man, so this little yellow-orange kind of figure in the bottom right-hand corner, and be able to drop it down on that roadway itself. So then you can, at your desk, take a look at that roadway and say, are there rails nearby? Is there any railroad crossings? Are there options of having any bike and pedestrian facilities currently out there, or are they lacking? And then being able to look a little bit more carefully about, where are these crashes happening, and kind of gathering that information. So you can all do this from within community maps here within this site. Go to that next slide, please. Once you're in that site and you want to maybe dig a little bit deeper into those crash report forms and be able to say, that first question was, did it happen during arrival and dismissal times? Is it happening with it? When you click on one of those dots, you will actually be able to pull up the crash report form. And so you would be able to see, at the top here, you can see with the crash date, you can see the crash time. So you can see it's 7:12. So on the arrival time into school. And then you can see information about the kind of diagram of the crash and the narrative associated with it. By looking at this form, you'll also be able to figure out the age of the pedestrian or the bicyclist that was involved in that crash. So you'll be able to narrow it down right to that school-aged children that this application is looking for. So when you get access, get a user account, you're able to get access to all the reportable motor vehicle crashes. The form is DT4000. And then through this form and through community maps, you're also able to examine the roadway characteristics. You can look at the type of roadway. You can examine if there is a railroad crossing nearby, if there are existing bike and pedestrian facilities. I'll put a little virtual asterisk next to that bike and ped facilities. Since this is a Google product, there might not always be up to date. So I always recommend going out into the field once you take a look at this and make sure that you have verified what the Google Earth is seeing, that you're seeing out there in the field as well too. Next slide, please. So hopefully this gave you some information about where you can go to help fill out a few of those parts of the application. But as always, if you have any questions, we're available to help. My name again is Andy Bill, and on this sheet you'll see my office phone, my mobile phone. You feel free to call or text, and then my email address. And on the right-hand side, you can see how you can get a hold of us at the Transportation Information Center, both through the TIC email and the TIC website. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to helping you with your projects.
Thank you, Andy. Following the cost detail estimate section of the application, you'll next find the project narrative response section. On screen are 5 question categories that applicants are asked to discuss in your narrative. These categories serve as a high-level overview of the types of questions that you'll be asked to address. Ultimately, it is the responsibility of the applicant to present a concise and engaging story through your narrative, as oftentimes the narrative plays a major role in the determination of whether or not your request will be successful. And lastly, as you approach the end of the application, you'll find a checklist of attachments that are required to submit. In order to submit a completed application, at a minimum, you are required to submit the completed application form in Microsoft Word format, a narrative response, as well as the cost detail estimate. Other items listed on screen are dependent on the scope of your project activity being proposed. However, all applicants are welcome to submit up to 6 pages of additional supporting documents such as photos, maps, and additional project description. Questions regarding attachments should be documented and sent to WisDOT as early as possible to ensure completed materials are on file by the application deadline. This now concludes our review of the TAPSTAR solicitation materials. Next, Meryl will walk us through a series of grant application tips as well as some additional resources you might consider leveraging as you complete your application.
Now, at this point, for those of you who may be new to the WisDOT local programs application process, and maybe as a reminder for some more experienced individuals, we wanted to take a step back and just go over some generalized basic tips to create a successful local programs application. I wanted to walk really through the process for writing a good application for local programs, or really any grant, from start to finish. First, you'll need to do some legwork and preparation related to the project. The first thing to do when a grant application period announcement comes out, and this may seem obvious, but you'll want to take a thorough look at the supporting documentation that's published by the grant issuing agency, in this case, the Wisconsin Department of Transportation. This is usually the program guidelines document, but in some supplemental project solicitations, there may be additional guidance. Study the relevant documents to make sure that you are eligible to apply and to be competitive. Gauging eligibility is generally pretty cut and dry. For WisDOT programs, there is usually a defined list of eligibility criteria. You have to be a taxable authority in an eligible project area. There's a 50,000 population requirement for our STP local program, for example, or the bridge ratings for our local bridge program, for another example. Now, gauging competitiveness can be a bit tougher. Generally, in our WisDOT programs, looking at the selection or evaluation criteria within the application materials can tell you everything that you need to know about competitiveness. After you've looked at supporting documentation for eligibility and competitiveness, then you can start tailoring your project and your application to the specific program. You'll want to develop a clear definition of both the project scope and the project need. You can also begin to conduct stakeholder outreach. Generally, engaging the community is a good idea, especially engaging those who would be affected by the project. Request a letter of support if that's allowed in the program that you're applying for. Sometimes you can include these in the grant application itself, or pull excerpts in your application narrative to make your application more compelling. If you are requesting a letter of support, make sure that you do so early, and also remember that you can always provide your writer with an example of a past letter so that they have a better idea of what to write. Now we'll move on to actions that should be taken during the application process. You'll want to complete all sections of the application materials. An incomplete application may not be considered. For our LRIP program, for example, we give applicants the chance to add required materials if they've forgotten to include them, but some programs do not afford applications that same sort of leniency. In applications that I've reviewed, the materials that are most commonly omitted include maps of project areas, breakdowns of eligible costs, and photos of the project area. Please remember, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Don't miss the chance to include them if you're allowed to. For our WisDOT programs, a locational map is generally required with each application, and one really great way to clearly highlight project area on a map is to use a WisDOT tool called Whistler, or the Wisconsin Information System for Local Roads, which has interactive mapping functionality. This is really helpful for demonstrating the precise termini of a project in one map, which is what our WisDOT programs require. Whistler also allows local governments to access information related to local roads, such as width, surface type, pavement condition rating, etc. Another must while writing your application, review your application materials for errors. Look for common errors like word swaps or misplaced punctuation. It can also be helpful to read the grant aloud to yourself or have an outside reviewer who is unfamiliar with the project take a look at it. This is independent verification that your grant is clear to those without a lot of inside knowledge of the project. And really, that feeds into a larger point about the need to write concisely and clearly. Some of the best applications employ the less is more strategy and keep their materials concise, specific, and clear. Many of our SDP programs include an application narrative section. This is your critical opportunity to include additional information about the scope and benefits of your project. Think of it as your opportunity to speak directly to the discretionary selection committee, if there is one for the program, and make sure that you write to the evaluation criteria. For STP Local, for example, the selection committee considers economic impact, state of good repair, or regional or local significance. So highlighting a timber mill or a scenic overlook that's impacted by your project is a good idea. For the TAP program, safety is a criteria. So for that program, you'll definitely want to speak to how your project promotes safety in your application narrative. This is information that any selection committee is going to need in order to make a decision. And your writing style absolutely matters here. I hear from selection committees that the best applications really sell the project by speaking directly to the evaluation criteria and engaging the reviewer with compelling information. Successful applications make it easy for the committee to think, this is a great project. It's worthy of funding in this program. After the application is complete, it's helpful also to just read through it one more time with the evaluation criteria in mind. This is how the committee of reviewers is going to be scoring your application. So reading it like a committee member can give you a lot of insight as to whether you're hitting the marks you intended to while writing it. Finally, know the application deadline. Submit your materials by that deadline. Be sure to note the time of day that the application is due, and if possible, submit it well in advance in case you have technology issues. Also, check your attachments before you send off the final version of your application. Finally, after submitting an application, a good applicant has 3 traits. They are proactive, patient, and persistent. I recommend that you confirm receipt of application materials in case there was an error in transmission. Also, if something changes with your project, for example, if an event occurs that requires some sort of a scope change, please update the department as soon as possible. For programs that do not have a publicized award announcement date, it can be helpful to ask when project awards are likely to be announced. Additionally, in the waiting period between application and award announcement, do not start construction or design work on your project if the work is included in your pending application. Projects with WisDOT funding are not authorized to incur costs until the contract between the state and the municipality, also known as the State Municipal Agreement or SMA, is signed by both parties. Finally, be persistent. Not all applicants are successful the first time, and these are often very competitive programs. If you aren't awarded initially, don't think of it as wasted time and effort. Your initial investment has essentially made you better positioned to be able to apply for project funding in the future. And with all of the recent historic funding opportunities that are happening, that is a great position to be in. And now I would like to share a few additional helpful resources. The department has just launched a new BIL webpage with information on the current BIL discretionary grant funding opportunities that are available outside of the local programs. This page includes information on what opportunities are available, how to apply for a discretionary grant, grant writing resources, and a link to request a letter of support from Department Secretary Craig Thompson, along with other valuable information. The short URLs are displayed at the bottom of the screen. You can also simply type WisDOT BIL discretionary funding in your preferred search engine, and it should be the first returned result. Here is the contact information for the folks in WisDOT Central Office. My contact info is displayed in the upper right. Travis is displayed in the upper left. And down below, we have local program supervisor Tim Alushigan and the BIL primary point of contact, Chris Brooks. Please feel free to reach out to any of the individuals listed here if you have questions about this TAP STARS project solicitation. Here is a statewide map that shows the WisDOT regions and the regional local program managers. These are great individuals to reach out to with delivery questions and who can point you to the appropriate project manager for your specific project. We have Randy Kirk in the Northwest region, Michael Erickson in the Southwest region, Ben Rostkowski in the North Central region, Kelsey Lorenz in the Northeast region, and Jake Varnes in the Southeast region. This slide gives links to a variety of helpful resources, including the WisDOT local programs BIL and TAP web pages, a useful listing of common local programs acronyms, and additional departmental and FHWA bicycle and pedestrian guidance. Please don't rush to write any of this information down. A copy of today's presentation deck will be posted to the BIL solicitation webpage. Now, we have already received a number of questions related to the TAP STARS solicitation, and I would like to provide answers for some of those questions today. One question that we've gotten: how can I apply for STARS? Which is certainly a great question. Application materials, as we've discussed, are available on the WisDOT BIL webpage. To be considered for funding, a complete application must be submitted to WisDOT by March 24th, 2023. Another question that we've gotten, and it's a common one: why is there a focus on rural areas for the STARS solicitation? This solicitation does have a rural focus due to the vast majority of BIL funding availability being targeted to rural areas. Historic TAP participation levels in these census-defined rural areas of less than 5,000 population have lagged compared to other population areas in the state. And we are hopeful that this solicitation is going to help to address that rural participation shortfall. Another question we've gotten: what applicant assistance is available to those unfamiliar with applying for federal funding? WisDOT can provide application assistance through either our central or regional office staff, but additionally, the University of Wisconsin Transportation Information Center, or TIC, is available to provide technical assistance. WisDOT is also actively developing a network of resources for local sponsors, so please continue to refer back to the TAP DOT webpage for additional updates. Another question: what is the minimum and maximum cost share for successful projects? The minimum cost share for TAP historically has been $50,000, which WisDOT understands could potentially be a barrier for smaller communities in accessing these TAP funds. Under the STARS initiative, applicants will have greater flexibility to propose projects with a total cost that is below this threshold. WisDOT is maintaining our standard policy regarding maximum project funding requests. Again, please refer back to the TAP webpage and program guidance document for details regarding project cost share. One more question: how do we access school demographic data? There are many potential sources of data that an applicant may refer to for demographics. Sources can include data directly sourced from a school or district, the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction, or DPI, database, or other sources such as the American Community Survey or other local sources. So contact WisDOT or Wisconsin DPI if you have questions regarding school demographic data. Lastly, are multiple applications allowed for STARS? WisDOT is encouraging applicants to compartmentalize their projects. Non-infrastructure projects for planning or safe routes to school projects can be accepted in single applications if the service area is solely within the applicant's purview. Infrastructure project applicants are encouraged to consider sectioning projects into separate submissions should either financial, scheduling, or other constraints be known at the time of application submission. So in addition to our contact info on the earlier slide, this email address displayed here, dot.wi.gov, is our main inbox for BIL related questions. Please feel free to send us a quick email if you have any questions as you review these TAP STARS application materials. Thanks again for your time today, and enjoy the rest of your day.